Dean Brian Schreiner for his support, John Stewart and his wonderful team here at Embosc, Colette and Jackie and Sergio, Charlotte Reinhardt that is here, always helping, and last but not least, my biggest appreciation to Luis Pimentel, a good friend who is started all of this, Lucrecia DeMarco and Marta Buches from Stefano Boeri's office and Actar Publishers for making all of this possible today. Today's lecture is one of the many events that we have planned for the 25th anniversary of the School of Architecture, and I would like to start with our land acknowledgement. The territory that we now know as South Florida has been the traditional homelands of the native nations, including the Tequesta, the Calusa, and today the sovereign homelands of the Seminole and the Miccosukee. It is my great pleasure to welcome Stefano Boeri, founder and principal of Stefano Boeri Architetti, with offices in Milano, Shanghai, and in Albania, who will present a lecture called Green Obsession, Trees Towards Cities, Humans Towards Forests. This lecture will trace the path that Stefano Boeri Architetti has followed in the last 15 years of practice, aiming at the redefinition of relationships between city and nature. His recent book, which is here, awarded by the Graham Foundation and published by Actar Publishers, aims to unveil the processes and complexities involved in the search of a new kind of urbanism, raising questions and opening new scenarios on relationships between the human species and living nature. Stefano was born in Milan. In 1980, he graduated in architecture at the Milan Politecnico, and in 1999, he received his PhD from the Istituto Universitario di Architettura di Venezia. He is currently full professor of urban planning at Milan Politecnico, has been a guest professor at multiple universities, including the Strelka Institute in Moscow, the Verlaine Institute in the Netherlands, Harvard University's GSD, and the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. He's also the director of Future City Lab at Tongji University in Shanghai, a postdoctoral research program which explores the future perspectives of global metropolises from the biodiversity and urban forestation perspectives. Among his contributions to the field of architecture, he has written or collaborated or participated in several books. And I have to say, I look at the books that I remember from some years back.
22 years ago.
Exactly, as Mutations with Rem Koolhaas. He also collaborated with the incredible photographers Gabriel Basilico and Domenico Giudice. He also wrote a book called Urban Ecology, Detroit and Beyond with Keon Park, and the International Center for Urban Ecology, and the wonderful Geoponti e Milano, which is a guide of Geoponti's buildings in Milano that he wrote the preface, and is also a project by the family, the Ponti's, Geoponti's family, among many other books. Stefano will talk about his work and research focusing on urban forestry in architecture and urban planning. And please join me in welcoming Mr. Stefano Boeri tonight.
Thank you so much. Is it possible to switch off the light or no?
Can we switch off these lights?
It's complicated.
No? We could do something. Not everything, but something. Okay, there you go.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's okay for you. Yeah, for me, better. Yeah.
And our friends from the public are asking to keep the cell phones off, down, or muted. Yes, Tomas.
Okay, thanks. Do you hear me? Also,
Can you put the TV in the middle, maybe?
Yeah, no, the point is that there's something with that. Maybe that.
that better?
Yes.
Much better, thank you.
All right.
Okay, good. Better. So thanks. It's really a pleasure to be here. And what I'm going to do now is simply to show, well, some images that are mirroring what we do. We have, let's say, two. One is in Milan and the other basically in Shanghai, China. We are now involved in several projects in different parts of the world. And basically, probably one of the characteristics of our work is that we are really, let's say, trying to keep together a design approach with a research approach. I believe that this is really a challenge. So how to put together an attitude which is more oriented to design, and it's as we know well is an attitude that finally let's say oblige us to arrive to select one unique configuration, one unique physical configuration, and another attitude which is more let's say research oriented, that it has to be inclusive. So we have to include information, we have to include material, thoughts. And basically it's not easy, as you know, as we know well, to find the right balance between the two approaches, the two attitudes, because they're really different. One is, let's say, oriented to open the future, to, let's say, explore the possibilities, the much number of possibilities that you can find in the future. The other one is, it's a more selective, more cruel attitude to finally define one unique physical material configuration with gravity, with its material, with its color. So, and I believe that it's so complicated to understand how to put these two attitudes in sequence, for instance. Maybe the best thing I think is to never try to put them in sequence, because probably the best idea comes when you are not expecting them, and also maybe the best also observation, the best analysis comes during the design process. So it's so complicated. But finally, what we do, as you see here, is we have a research department in Milano and in Shanghai, and we started to work 25, 26 years about, let's say, how to find a new relation, a new, let's say, connection with living nature, imagining that living nature in all its character should not be considered simply as an ornamental presence or a decoration when we think to architecture, or when you think to the future of the city. And we have just published a book, thank you for presenting it, where we are, let's say, gathering as a contribution of people that are working with us, what is inspirational for us. I'm sure that you know them. Probably our work was considered useful and interesting when we started 10 years, 12 years ago to build the first, let's say, architectural concept that is an example of how it's really possible to, let's say, to make this idea of new alliance between living nature and artificial architecture something of real, not simply a concept, not simply a wish. So we started to work on that many years ago at different levels. That was COP21 in Paris, for instance, was the first time we present the idea of the vertical forest, and then in many other possibilities. But just to tell you that this was very strongly connected with this idea of oscillation between research and design, oscillation between these two fields, these two approaches, these two attitudes that are and should be in a way reconsidered. I was in Sharm 2 weeks ago at COP27. Honesty was quite delusional. I believe that if we simply observe this forum as let's say a kind of continuous negotiation between nations to, let's say, to fix the targets, well, finally the result is sometimes only some good intention and nothing more. So that's one of the reasons and I really believe that we should a little bit change the perspective and what we do, what you do, what I do in terms of making our approach to architecture something that could become seriously extremely efficient, extremely useful, extremely important for the future environmental issue. Well, I believe this is such an important point. We know that real estate, building, construction, architecture produce more than 40% of the greenhouses gases of CO2 that we spread in our atmosphere. So why not to think that maybe starting with a kind of bottom-up process, starting from how we work when we think to the future of our cities, to the future of the building that we design, maybe that could be much more efficient and pragmatic. Well, we normally used to start with some consideration about the ratio between cities and forests. It's a very stupid comparison, but if we could, let's say, put together, concentrate all what we consider city, so small, middle-sized, big cities, metropolis, megalopolis, we will not cover more than 3–4% of the surface of the emerging land of the planet. So you see here where we can concentrate in part of Europe, but we know well that in terms of, say, first of all, this kind of urban Pangea is continuously growing, and well, when we published the mutation book and the research on mutation with RAM, the idea was really to try to describe the explosion of the urban condition, of the urban phenomena. We were starting to observe what was happening in Central Africa or in East Asia, and has let's say a kind of immense creation of planetary conurbation. We know also how much this urban Pangea, which is finally not so relevant if we observe it from a satellite point of view, it's consuming energy and natural resources of the planet and producing around the 70–75% of the greenhouse CO2 emissions that are, as we know, are the origin of climate change. On the other side, if we observe forests and woodlands, they are covering basically something like 30% of the surface of major land. And we know as well that what they do in terms of protecting and developing biodiversity, absorbing that CO2. This is what makes the presence of plants, trees so important in our life. They do what we are not able to do. So they absorb the CO2 that we have already produced. We have done a lot in terms of avoiding to produce CO2, but if we think of how we could absorb the greenhouse gases that we already produced, well, basically we have trees, basically we have plants, and the ocean for sure that contributes to that. So I think that if we just start from that, we understand easily how plants could help us, and that was the starting point of our work 20–25 years ago. So we started to think, well, if it is true, if we have to imagine how to make cities greener, because it's exactly there where let's say cities are the origin of global warming, that we could, let's say, imagine to implement the biological green surfaces in order to balance this connection, and basically we know that cities green are forming. So that the main issue was really to see how it was possible to switch or to make cities not simply the first cause and the first victims, because just think to coastal metropolitan environment, how they are, let's say, hit by the global washing, but how we can imagine that cities could become the protagonist of the campaign to slow down or to tackle the disadvantages, the effects of global warming. And that's why we started to, let's say, to translate this the concern, if you want, in something of very pragmatic. So the idea was, well, okay, let's start to see if it's possible to create a building, maybe a high-rise building, which could mirror this kind of concern and this kind of dream, why not? To create an ecosystem where building and trees could be compared. There are some reasons to compare them. They are both stable, they have to develop a kind of very strong, resilient strategy. They use water, they use sun, and they put them together. We were inspired by many different, let's say, thinkers. This is, for instance, an Italian writer, Italo Calvino. He was born in Cuba and then moved to Italy. He wrote this book, Down the Trees, at the end of the 50s. It was amazing. It was a story of a young duke that decided when he was 12 to abandon the family and to spend the rest of his life on the branch of a forest. It's amazing, I suggest. It's a book, but for sure we cannot forget him, Joseph Beuys, who was one of the heroes of last century art. And he in Kassel in 1981, he was, let's say, gathering some thousand of these stones and then changing them, sanding them, and building with thousand of oak trees. And he started to plant everywhere in Kassel. Kassel is a city in northern Germany. To start to plant everywhere trees, oak trees, and thanks to that he changed it. He changed the city. The city was totally changed by this operation. So that was the beginning, some obsession where we were thinking how to put the plants and to, let's say, to have trees, not simply shrubs or simple plants. They were to real trees on these two high-rise, and we started to study also the possible contribution in terms of capacity to absorb not simply the CO2 but also the pollution, the micropollution, microparticulate, which is produced basically by the traffic, we studied all that, and finally that's a result. And this is a picture of some year ago. So basically we have here 21,000 tents in two high-rise buildings. One is 115 to 20, and the other is 95 meters. So in terms of feet, it's, I don't know, I don't remember now. We also started to study the effects of that. So how they are really seriously contributing to us for greenhouse gases, how they are cleaning the air, how they are protecting, and that's something was super important, how they are shadowing the facade. So it's kind of double facade, the biological facade and then the artificial facade. And the biological facade is creating a microclimate condition that is also a way to shadow the second facade. And the difference in summertime in Milano is about 30 degree, not Fahrenheit, but Celsius. And it's quite important also as one of the very most serious effects of this tower. So thanks to that, thanks to this prototype, that was really a result of something that was in between research and design. We started to work trying to improve what we did, and also to make this building in a way like really an experiment. So we studied the success. We tried it was an expected success and also the unexpected unsuccess, respect problems, respect the limits of what we did. And when we finished to build this, we started immediately to see how it was possible to replicate in a way this concept of vertical forest in different contexts, in different sites. Now I show you some of these examples because I think it's interesting to see also how our profession is working. So one of the main concerns was about maintenance, and that was one of the solutions we found was to let's involve a group of gardeners that are also climbers. And these flying gardeners was, yes, great. It was very simple, but then they cut the cost of maintenance and the capacity quality of maintenance is no comparison with the usual one. We are now working in different countries with many projects. We are in construction with many of vertical forests. And basically, just to show you some, this is probably the first we have developed, was in 2014, was in Switzerland, Lausanne. And in this case, we were working not with balconies, but with lodges. So, but I show this because for us, it's very important to start from, let's say, a serious observation of the climate condition of that place. Then, second step, we select, thanks to our, let's say, botanic department, we select the species of plants, shrubs, trees, and only as a first step, we start to design the buildings, architecture of them. Because for sure we have to respect and to study the evolution trajectory of every species, and when we know that, we understand how we can design the empty space between the balcony and the other balcony, between two loggia, between two parts of the composition of the architectural facade. And this is what was, for instance, Lausanne was very important because in this case, basically we're working with cedars, with different families of cedars, and so we studied that, and this is in construction in Lausanne. But that's another step we did. So we are in Eindhoven. Eindhoven is northern Holland. It's a very, very, let's say, important city because it was one of the most famous industrial in Europe. Was a region of Siemens and many other things. And that in that case, what we did was to try to cut the construction cost. And you see here what we did. So the result is a building, is a high building with hundreds of trees and plants in social housing. So it's really affordable for students and group and young professionals. And this is for me really a step forward. Very, very important for what helped us to develop other projects like this one in many different parts of the world that are affordable vertical forests. So vertical forests are really in condition to be used by everybody. And also in this case we did this thanks to a very serious work around prefabrication. So you see not simply the posts but also the linear part of the facade are the result of prefabrication techniques, and that's it. And this building is very promising in my opinion, and works so well, and it's used by hundreds of students, young professionals. It's a very simple layout, so you see, but also very flexible in terms of how they can be used and reused and transformed, and is sometimes also completely transfigured by the user of professional that makes the building. And this is our, let's say, when we go to visit the material, you know what's happened. We need to see where we go there. So every time we have a kind of botanic nursery, you can call it in this way, nearby this construction site, and we go there to select the plant, to select the trees, to follow how they grow, to see how we can then move them to the construction site, and that's what also we did in the case of Eindhoven. We have replicated the same thing in Hangguang. This is China. Is a very affordable social housing vertical forest, and we are now in construction in many other parts. I just sum up some of example. This is Nanjing, still in China. What makes this project interesting? This is because it's super high rise, but it's also one is hotel and other is office building. This is Utrecht, and where in this case the building is interesting because it's mixed use. So it has a commercial basement and office and different floor of residential, and also in this case the variety of species is quite relevant, and also we have change in the facade. For sure, also we are every time considering the climate condition, but also the windy condition, humidity, and many other, let's say, limits or constraints. And so that's explain why we have to change sometimes the relation between artificial element and plants. For instance, in Northern Europe or in northern China, we decided to use plants that are losing the leaves in winter time just to make the sunlight entering better. On the southern facade, we normally, like you were saying also, when we started to work in places like, for instance, Cairo, where we have built this, so for sure in this case, the point is, well, let's try to create really a kind of serious filter that can, let's say, make the interior of this building. This is in construction in New Cairo, and that's some of the other project that you've done. This is in Italy, and it's a project that we just finished to build at a different scale. And this is another version where this is Antwerp in Belgium, and in this case we are working more on the roofs. So the green roofs are like common goods, common place for all the tenants of the place. And the same kind of concept we have developed in Milano in another project called Bosco Navigli, which is a high-rise, not seriously high-rise, ground floor, but it's a courtyard building. It's not a vertical, simply vertical building with all the facade covered by plants, and that's a version of what we've done. And at the same time, we have been asked to do things that we're not expected to do, like in this case in Brussels. I show this because it's a completely different approach, but interesting. So that was a client who asked us to change a free office building, this huge public building, transforming in a green architecture and residential building. So we have invented, let's say, a structural autonomous facade with plants that could be added like a little bit like autonomous facade did with such an amazing and innovative way in French with Meuble Social some years ago. And this was another way. So that was a way also to be sure that what we are going to do, what we do, could be also used in order to make, in order to change the quality and also the, let's say, the nature of existing building, not simply move out new building. Another step that you are doing is in the material, the construction material. This is an example. That's a competition we won with Dileria Scofidio in Milano. So they are retrofitting the building that you see on the right, which is a very known building who comes from the 60s. And this is a tower that we are designing called Botanica. And in this case, we are using wood, timber, to create the slabs, and you know how much this can cut the production of CO2 in the construction process, and at the same time is fixing CO2. And so it's such a great, important, serious, useful, efficient contribution to make this building, let's say, really capable to with the environmental issue. For sure, I didn't talk about that, but we have, from the beginning, started to put together different elements of the construction. So it's not only about green. We know that, for instance, these buildings are, in a way, individual ecosystems that hostile cohabitation of humans, plants, birds. In Milano, we have more than 20 different species of birds that are nesting. We did the same in Holland, the same in China. So it's so great to see how they change this kind of. They really introduce a different biodiversity in terms of cohabitation. But at the same time, we are used to have those solar panels on the facade, also on the vertical side, part of the balconies and the loggias. We used geothermal water. We are now working so much also in the water management, which is so important. So basically the idea is to make this building capable to become small energy plant that can, let's say, absorb renewable energy from the sun, from the wind sometimes. They can use water and not only act as green in terms of having plants and trees on the facade. And I think when we will be in condition to combine these two, that will will have been very important. There is another project in Paris, and this is one of the last projects is in Sao Paulo. It's interesting because also in this case it's a mixed use with a very, let's say, mineral basement, but you go up and then it changes and it reflects the layout of the building. And this is what we presented in Sharm. It's interesting because it's like in the case of Cairo, it's quite an extreme attempt to show that it's possible to do things like this in a very extreme, in a very, let's say, arid and developmental condition. And so in that case, we're also introducing hydroponic agriculture inside with a system of greenhouses on the different parts of the buildings, and water management where desalinization is connected with renewable energy from the solar energy of the sun. And this is also something that we are now following with the idea to make it really possible. But that's one chapter of what we do. We also try to let's say to make this attempt a condition to create effects at a different scale. So just to show you some of our where we're involved. This is Milano, where we launched this campaign to plant 3 million trees, and we are now working on the system of abandoned array yards and to reintroducing also this, let's say, this idea of a kind of let's say green connection between different parts of the city, how they can change and improve part in a different sense. This is Albania. This is Tirana, the capital of Albania, where we won a competition for the master plan 12 years ago, and now we are really doing that. So they have planted a kind of new orbital forest around the city, which is there, and also some green wings inside the city. And we are now working in a very small part where we are designing this kind of new green district, which has also some interesting character in terms of allowing every citizen to find the utilities that needs in the cycle of a day time in order to have, let's say, we used to say 50 million city, but or 500 meter city, but it's, I think, something that is quite important, and how to make it. And in this case also, for instance, we are proposing to use the roofs, like we have done in Antwerp, as public space, a space where they can, in a way, replicate the role of courtyards in European historical cities. And the use of roofs, I think, will be part of the future of what we will do with architecture. At different scale, we have been asked some years ago to design a possible evolution of the Genève city metropolis in Switzerland. And that's a result. What we proposed was to imagine to extend the city not along the lake, but creating a constellation of small urban centers. But the point of what makes this proposal for me interesting is that at the center of this new, let's say, conurbation, which is also surrounded by trees and forest, you don't have a square, you don't have a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a monument, you have a mountain. And so the idea was to connect Genève and another city, which is here in French, having at the center the Salade Mountain, which is also a place which is very interesting from the point of view of biodiversity. And we are, let's say, replicating on the surface of this land what the CERN is doing, to create this kind of accelerator, the new accelerator, that we have the same circumference of what we do. So that was a way also to make these two conurbation more efficient, and it was also a way to use that. And here we have an image of what will be seen from the top of the center of this new metropolitan environment, which has at the center a natural environment, which is a mountain, not a square, not a public street. And that was, in a way, a provocation. I know that, but it's something that we believe to be extremely interesting and hopefully stimulating. There are parts of the world where we still need to build cities. It's not the case of North America, it's not the case of Europe, but for instance, China, we have 13, 14 million people that every year abandon in the countryside. And so we started many years ago with Biodiversity, with our office to work on that, and to see how it's possible to imagine new combinations that are trying to avoid this continual expansion of the peripheral environments in China that makes these cities losing quality and creating conditions of a city. So it's not about forest city, but it's also about how we can imagine to create an alternative. At the same time, we have been asked to experiment new green cities in other countries. This is, for instance, around Cairo, where we're built on this idea to have a new environment and at the same time to make the city greener. And this is Mexico, this is Cancun, nearby Cancun, where we have been asked to intervene after this kind of disaster produced by a Chinese small company who was, let's say, destroying part of the mangrove forest, creating this huge concrete surface, and the project was blocked by the municipality, and they asked us to manage a different project, and we proposed to do that. It was a university, so a city with more than 8 million of plants, and it's just at the moment a proposal, but we are discussing it, and we are seriously going ahead also and trying to detail different parts, combining different parts. Basically, also in this case, you see, the idea was to have a buffer of solar panels and greenhouses, so it should and could really find a way to defend the kind of sufficiency, not simply in terms of energy, but why not also in terms of transformation of agricultural products into food. And this is the Cancun project. Just to conclude, some concepts which arrive at a different scale. You probably know Richard Weller. Richard Weller is a genius in a way, and he was invented this idea of a world park, which is a very simple concept. So that, and if we should translate in few words, is if we put together the biodiversity hotspots that we have on the planet, we can really multiply the advantage of this biodiversity. So the world park, as you see, it's about connection. It's about connectivity. It's biodiversity and connectivity, which are the two key entries of the future. And what he does was, let's say, let's study that, and simply to see what could be done. And he was really calculating the amazing advantages of that. But we know that there's something that already happening in a way. Also in the part of the world where the conditions of the climate conditions are so extreme, so complicated. This is Central Africa, just behind the Sahara Desert, and that's this green Great Wall that different, like 9 countries from Senegal to Ethiopia started to build thanks to African Union countries in 2009. And now this attempt to create a barrier, a green barrier, could start to stop the extension of the Sahara to our south. It starts to work. With a lot of difficulties, with a lot of complication, but it's there. And it is an amazing lecture. It's an amazing lecture that we have seriously to learn and to take in consideration. So, going ahead on that, we started also to imagine how to create this biological corridors, planetary corridors in different parts of the world. For instance, in China, where they have the same problem to stop the extension of the Donghi Desert or another part of the system. And this is, for instance, what we are working on today in Italy, so to creating a system of biological corridors that have to involve cities, not simply as obstacles to this idea of biological corridor, but as place where, thanks to this new alliance between living nature and artificial environment, we become the generator of a new condition. I stop here.
All right. I just want to open the floor for questions from the students or friends or colleagues who are here. Yes, Ray, go ahead.
I've got 1,000 questions, so do you have time?
Yeah.
So, a lot of your work was concentrated in Europe, and I'm wondering if they were more, people in Europe are more receptive to what you're doing than people in the United States. Where I know it, like I know somebody was trying to do something a little bit similar 20 years ago in Boston, and I don't think it got anywhere. So I'm wondering if you've tried to do projects here, and how receptive the United States is.
Well, I have some hope to do something also in the United States. We are working in Chicago. We started to work in Chicago, and before COVID also we had an amazing opportunity in New York. Was delayed, and well, Miami I think is an amazing magnet. It's an amazing place for the future of this possible combination of living nature and architecture. So I don't believe it's a question of culture or something. I think it's, well, maybe for us it was easier to work in China, for instance, or in Africa or North Europe simply because well, I don't know, it's happened. But there are so many very good architects that are doing the same in the United States. We are working in South America, but yeah, but it's a good question.
Yes, fantastic projects that you're working on. And just, I took so many pictures. My camera was already run down, and now it's like completely out. But so I wanted to ask you. You said you presented at COP27. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So what kind of momentum do you think urban forestry has as a result of either Sharm el-Sheikh or the collective of COPs?
I think it's, as I was saying, it's quite delusional. So basically I believe that cities and city networks are much more efficient in trying to develop this concept of urban forestation, urban forestry, for instance, than nation or states. So a network like C40, you know C40.
Yeah.
So it's, sorry, please.
Well, I was just going to say, so Bloomberg and his constellation is highly supportive
Or
of this
100
work?
resilient cities, or other kind of networks that are working well also in Asia, and now started to have some of them. So they are much more efficient than so because I believe that majors are the real protagonists of all that. No? So well, climate conditions don't have borders, national borders don't have, so and also the natural catastrophe produced by global warming have not national borders, but cities matter. So cities are really the center of this possible, the protagonist. I believe that.
I have a question.
Go.
How's the safety of trees going up? How does that look like? Because let's say Miami, we have a lot of hurricanes, so it's like you don't want to have falling trees. How do you solve that?
Yes, this is a very serious point. This is not so different. So, for instance, in northern Europe, in Holland, you have sometimes wind that are very, very strong. We have, let's say, copyrighted with ARP that were with us from the beginning, a way to fix the roots of the pots. But well, every time we start working on windy condition, and we normally came here to check in the huge wind galleries how tree. I have not a video here, but so every time we came in to check, it's a serious point for sure. Thanks. Yes, please.
Stefano, great work. It goes way back 40 years, right, in Europe, or maybe longer. It's in the tradition of urban forestry and greening cities. So there are a lot of examples in Germany, Austria, Italy, of course. I would like to talk about the details. Can you describe the details, let's say, in a climate zone like Amsterdam? So how do you design the system? How do you calculate the loads, precipitation, the maintenance, the life cycle.
The details in terms of structural details,
Yeah.
or depends. It's
Or you only do conceptual design? Or you
no,
also-
we do everything for
Okay,
sure.
then describe
So
it.
it depends. It depends from site to site. Depends from the height of the building.
Amsterdam.
Depends from.
Amsterdam.
We didn't
the
work.
Netherlands.
We are still not working in Amsterdam.
Oh, then another place.
Petra, Blaze.
Another place.
In another place, like another example.
For instance, you know what is post-tense slabs? What I mean
Yeah.
with post-tense. So that was a way we were starting to calculate how the presence of these big pots that we have on the perimeter of the balconies could be better balanced. But just to enter more in the detail, it's so important to define the right chemical composition of the ground, because you cannot have a ground which is too light, otherwise the roots, but at the same time not too heavy, because when it's raining, for instance, gathering water is becoming very complicated. So we have some, let's say, criteria that we follow, but every time it changes depending from the material we're going to use, depending from instance, now we're starting to use timber, and it changed so much. So there is one answer. There are many possible answers related with a specific condition, related with a specific selection of species that we do, that are related with the climate condition. So it's interesting because it's always a balance between different parts of the world. Please.
So for years I've thought that it was almost architectural malpractice not to have to see a new building going up and not to have a garden on top, a food garden. And so food garden, yeah. And so I thought, do any of your projects also incorporate food gardens?
Yes, we start to do
in
that,
our
yeah.
world today, where so
Yeah.
many people are
No,
starving.
it's so important. I think it's basically we are working more with hydroponic
Right.
culture. So instead of having, let's say, normal traditional garden, but I'm sure that the idea of vertical farms, for instance, if we connect vertical, like we are going to do in Dubai, connecting vertical farm with, let's say, this kind of diffusion of trees on the facade of the building, it's we can enrich the architectural solution and also enrich its efficiency. I totally agree. It's also in that case really seriously connected with the water management, which is one of the most complicated and at the same time important and interesting issue of our work. So we work with a group of engineers that every time calculates how much water we use, how much grey water we recycle, how much water we can from the ground to let's say to reduce the thermal excursion in wintertime and summertime, how much water we can use from the rain, how much water, and that in this case we are using an Israeli technology to a system of irrigation which is extremely efficient in terms of how it can be used to monitorize the condition of humidity of the pot, at the same time to calculate the irrigation. So water management is basic of what we do. Sun, water, and wood, I should say. Yes.
First of all, congratulations on the work. I'm a big fan personally. My question is kind of simple. It's who do you think benefit more from your work or enjoy more your work? People that are part of cultures that are already embedded with connecting with nature, or people that lack the connection with nature?
I answer in a different way. At the beginning, when we started to think to the vertical forest in Milano, and you know that the project was built by Heinz. Heinz is a Houston-based, just to go back, Houston-based, very traditional, quite conservative developer. But first time I met Mr. Heinz and I proposed this idea, he told me, I said, well, you're completely crazy, we'll never build that. But then instead of being, well, I give you 6 months or 3 months maybe. If you come back with an answer to this list of questions, we could start. And we did it, and he was very serious and, let's say, coherent. But one of the main issues was about maintenance. Because the point was, what should we do? We should involve the tenants, the owner, to do the maintenance of all what is green, or we should go in the direction of a centralized maintenance. And I was for the first decision, the first direction, and I was wrong. I was wrong, and we started to simulate the two possible versions, and we decided to go for the second, and we are always going to the second direction. And I understood that I was wrong, and that was a mistake, because I didn't understood that I didn't understand that if all the tenants start to consider the plant as a kind of common good of the entire building, also to change so much the way you are investing in that, that you are respecting the life of plants, of trees, and so it's not an answer, but it's part of the answer. Please.
So, related with the water management, how can you imagine in countries like Mexico, because Cancun is something else, but doing these towers, how can, or in places or in cities where water is a problem,
Yes.
and that tenants and the people, they don't understand mostly what the common good is. So how can you imagine these buildings in these cities?
It's every time the effort to balance the resource that you have and the opportunity that you give. So we are now building in Cairo. Cairo is such arid and complicated. We have been involved also to do things like this in Riyadh, in Dubai, in Doha, where Mexico sometimes, let's say, from a certain point of view, is easier as a planning condition compared to this one. So it's you have to reduce maximum the use of water. When you can introduce a concept of desalinization, but of seawater, but also that technique has an impact on the environment in terms of salt. So it's a complicated balance, but it's possible to do it for sure.
I just wanted to get back to the human issue. You mentioned the issue of using a maintenance crew instead of using tenants. I know in a regular plain old condominium building, you have endless variety in the people that are in it, and they fight with each other all the time, and all kinds of things happen. Do you have any screening process for who gets to live there? Or what is your experience with the interaction of the people living in those buildings, that they learn how to cooperate and maximize and optimize?
This is a very, very, very good question, because well, the building in Milano, it's at the beginning was, let's say, it was sold up with a price, the value was not so high. Now it has doubled, so it's for sure for high income people. But at the same time, it's quite, let's say popular. It's a place where tenants are used to share let's say also the maintenance of plants. The kids are, let's say, studying how birds are nesting. So there is something of really interesting in the way also living in this space, and let's say waking up in the morning and having the leaves, or maybe you are 80 or 100 meters high, and let's say you see the skyline filtered by the leaves of a plant who has in truth maybe 15 meters below. This is such an amazing experience, and it's a way to, let's say, make these different cultures, the biodiversity in terms of also regions, this culture of people let's say, combine their experience. It's interesting, absolutely. Also from a social behavioral context.
Just a curiosity, other than the student housing that you explained, I forget where it is
In
located.
Eindhoven.
In Eindhoven, okay. The developers or the owners that are retaining your services for these buildings, are they targeting investment type of ownership, or are they actually targeting full-time, 365 days a year inhabitants for those apartments?
Sorry, I did not understand well.
So are these developers making these buildings for investment property, or are they actually to live in by their?
Depends. We
And
have
so
also
what's the
two
price range that
combination.
they go
Depends
for?
so much. So in the case of Heinz, for instance, they both and then they sell, and now it's the building is owned by a different property. In other cases, like the case of Eindhoven, it's something like a B company. So it's interesting.
B corporation.
It's a B corporation who stays there and is interested to run the process and to follow what will happen. So for us, it's much more interesting because we started from the beginning to work together in order to make this, let's say, this dream to have a social house in particular forest rehabilitation. So it changed so much. Honestly, this is not a unique phenomenology of how the developers and the constructors are using to stay around.
Yeah, because as iconic buildings in each city, which they would naturally be, the tendency would be to have perhaps a high demand for the prices of those apartments to rise to the point of them actually just representing investments and not actual people living in them.
But well, I think from another point of view, the demand for affordable building is so high today, everywhere, also in Miami. So I think it depends so much from the nature of your company and also the target of the sale of the company. But sometimes, why not? If you also develop a certain number of buildings like this one, the income you have is, in any case, interesting. For sure, is the delta is different, but the number of opportunity you have makes the delta interesting also in the case it's reduction compared with the others. So it depends.
What about, I was thinking structural issues in like the northern hemisphere, maybe you don't have trees on the north side, is that correct?
Sometimes we have trees, but we have trees that are living leaves. This happens when, like in the northern countries, the sunlight in wintertime is very low, and so you need to make, let's say, the windows condition to make the light entering better. So also in that case, there is not one unique solution, no? Because plants are living subject, individuals, and you have really to respect their life and to also to compose. In terms of biodiversity, Milano is more than 45 different species of trees and 110 different species of shrubs and other and cover plants and so plants. So also the term of biodiversity, we try always to create something which is very unique. At the same time, and I forgot to tell this, one of the most unexpected results of this building is that they simply change. They change. They change every year, they change every season, and sometimes they change every day. They change color, they dimension, and this for me is amazing, how they are mirroring the change of time. Wow. This is nature.
I'm just wondering because, I mean, I think you are probably the pioneer of doing that. Have you ever thought about like collecting all these data throughout these many years and like maybe questioning the like people happiness related to that or many other things?
We didn't copyright any of our, let's say, technical solutions, and we are now trying to create a metaverse forest city where we are putting together all what we have done in order to make this accessible for other colleagues, and for sure from that point of view also the what we have done in terms of studying the advantages and the results of building in terms of environmental issues is part of this project. To describe this as an experiment. I think it's an experiment, so nothing more, nothing less. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, good